Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 26th, 2025, and today we're going to be talking about the state of Virginia and brand new news out of the state that shows that Democrats across the state are planning to redraw the maps here in this state ahead of the 2026 midterm elections to give Democrats the upper hand as they go into the final stretch of the 2025 season and right into the prime time of the midterm elections. Now, I know Halloween is this week and it's right around the corner, but I think that nothing really scares Republicans more than Democrats being willing to fight back in some of these states that they otherwise thought the Democrats might be taking a backseat turn and look at the Republicans across the country as they do redraws in states like Missouri, North Carolina, and Texas, among many others. And now the Democrats are finally standing up and pushing back as Virginia stands to be the second state that seems to be pushing forth with a congressional redraw for the upcoming midterms. Now, the Virginia Democrats in this redistricting push that they've set across the state haven't really indicated exactly what they are going for, but a recent tweet from the Democratic leader in the Virginia State Senate here seems to be considering very openly a 10-to-1 map that was just hypothetically discussed over here when it comes down to the congressional boundaries that might come about in 2026. On election Twitter, this map was floating around of a 10-to-1 safe map the Democrats could rely on in 2026 and would essentially cut down Republican representation down to just 9% across the state of Virginia, whereas they currently have roughly half the seats in the Virginia delegation. Now, having the Senate leader on the Democratic side, really the president pro tempore, but a very notable name in Virginia politics, it seems like a very comical thing. But Senator Louise Lucas, who we've been tracking for quite some time, we actually made a video on this 6 months ago when they were talking about, not 6 months ago, rather 3 months ago when they were talking about the redraws in Texas. She actually was the first to make note that she was interested in a redraw across Virginia, had tweeted out as such that they were going to start rallying the troops and getting the Democrats in line for an expected vote for 2025. We got closer and closer to the election. It didn't seem like it was going to happen. And so now the Democrats have called the session assuming that they have the required votes. So months after the original tweet was made by Senator Louise Lucas, it seems very, interesting that this is the way we are getting our political news, but it just simply is how it is. We see that it comes from the very top and it starts to trickle down, and now the Democrats are going to be voting on it, and it's very likely going to pass. Otherwise, they probably would not have held this vote in the first place. Democrats have a very slim advantage here, and I think that they would pass ultimately the change in congressional map drawing authority from the independent commission that was passed in 2020 and return it back to the state legislature. And given that Democrats are about to usher in a massive advantage in the state legislature, even larger than 2017, larger than 2019, larger than 2023, chances are there that they will use that authority to draw whatever type of map that they want. And so thinking that there's an active, elected official in Virginia engaging with this map, the same elected official that foretold what would be the news that broke just days ago, it really does call into question, is this something that Senator Louise Lucas is going to do? Now, an interesting bit of lore that I think is lost on this case is that Louise Lucas is a victim herself of gerrymandering in the state of Virginia. Back in the 2001 special election that took place in this state, this race was an exceptionally competitive one that both sides of the aisle spent immense amount of money on. It was right after the 2000 election, and this was a Republican district, when it came down to the presidential level, but it was one that Democrats previously had been able to hold on to. When you take a look at the House vote in the state of Virginia going back to 2001, what you might notice here is that this, let's see if we can find it here, the 4th district, let's see if it's going to jump over anywhere, in 2000 was largely unopposed. But then you go into 2001, Republicans are investing in it. This is obviously an unopposed race because the incumbents here are popular and also a very different day and age for politics. I mean, just look at how much blue is on this map here. I can guarantee you, Arkansas was not voting blue on the presidential level, but there's a reason why Democrats were so strong in some of these states. Even in Texas, a state that George W. Bush went on to win by over 20 points, ended up being a state that had a majority of its representation coming from the Democratic Party. But again, getting back to this point about Virginia, this district, the reason I pointed out on the map here is to show you what happened here. It's a district that its boundaries were drawn to be quite competitive. And in the 2001 election, it was decided by a margin of roughly 4 points. But it was expected that Louise Lucas would go ahead and pivot and run in the general election. And in the 2001 election, it was won by a margin here of roughly 4 points. And so when we think about why Luis Lucas, again, has this personal reason for even wanting to participate in this conversation around congressional redraws in the first place, is because this hits at a very personal level, given that she's been in the state Senate ever since then and saw the Republicans not only redraw their maps in 2000 that effectively cut her out of having any viability in any future congressional race, they also did it again in 2010. And so it makes sense that Democrats who have felt far too often across this country like their numbers were being dwindled by what the existing Republican Party is doing. When we look at why this also makes such an impact on the national level, you can look no further than what a projected 2026 midterm environment might look like and why that makes all the difference for Democrats if they're able to be successful in a redraw in a state like Virginia. For instance, when we take a look at the last cycle, we can go ahead and just shift the national numbers here in favor of the Democratic Party by roughly 5 points. It's expected that Democrats right now with the generic ballot polling are up by about 2 points. They lost the last election by roughly 2.6. So we're going to round up by half a percentage point and say Democrats, move over by, 5 points to the left. And so that 5 points makes a huge difference. It's 230 to 205 on the congressional breakdown here. But that's our Republicans who know that just whittling away at some of these individual Democratic seats could actually do them a tremendous service for the 2026 midterms. When they look at states like Texas, for instance, and they take away those 5 seats from the Democrats, those numbers really start to dwindle on the Democratic side. It starts to look quite bad for the Democrats there. That advantage the Democrats previously had of 230 to 205, a 25-seat advantage would be whittled down to just a 15-seat advantage, 225 to 210, and just 6 seats more than the necessary number to feel comfortable at that majority seat of 218 across the map here. And so it isn't just Texas, though. We know that North Carolina recently passed a new map, Missouri as well, right? So we're working with numbers here where the Republicans have effectively taken what would be, if Democrats are to reclaim the House majority, as they are expected to today, would bring that 230 number, which would be more than enough to block Donald Trump's agenda and be effective as Democrats in the House, but it would bring them down to 223. It also is interesting, too, Indiana is going to vote this week on a new map here. It seems like there's enough holdouts on the Republican side, but when push comes to shove, maybe the president of the United States can be that dominating factor on the Democratic side, on the Republican side rather, and pushing those GOP senators in a different direction. But Ohio is also set to have a potential redraw there, boosting the numbers on the Republican side. So you can start to see exactly why the Democrats feel as if they must retaliate. Because the expectation here in the next cycle is that if you were just to shift the map by 5, Democrats would be at 230, but now they would be at 221. And that sort of explains why Proposition 50 in California is so important to the Democratic Party, right? The numbers here are 221 for the Democrats to 214. It's a slim majority and the narrowest of any Democratic majority we have seen in the 21st century. And so it would make all the difference, with these 9 seats moving towards the Republican Party, which is why Democrats feel so compelled to fight back. And on a math standpoint, it actually makes more sense why you see this active engagement with a 10-to-1 map that might seem unrealistic given that, 46% of the state votes for Republicans on the presidential level. But if the Democrats are the ones drawing the maps here, they can do the same thing like in Tennessee, where Democratic representation has been reduced down to just 1 seat. Or in a state like Arkansas, where Republicans have full dominance over the congressional boundaries there, but Democrats are winning routinely 35 to 40% of the vote. Or in a state like Utah, where the citizens passed a referendum stopping gerrymandering. And the state legislature, rather than putting it up for a vote like Virginia and California want to do, instead doing it themselves and rescinding a citizens-led referendum and making it so it is impossible for Democrats who comprise 35 to 40% of the state from having a single seat of representation in Washington, D.C. But again, getting back to the math games here, the numbers that we are seeing, well, let's take a look. In the state of California, Democrats are looking for 5 additional seats. If they get that, you are going to find that the numbers here go from 221 for the Democrats up to 226. So it does a good job at counteracting Texas, but it doesn't really go further enough that it can counteract what some of these other Republican states are doing, like Missouri, like Ohio, like North Carolina. And that's where Virginia comes into play. In a 2026 midterm, Democrats probably would gain a seat in Virginia, but that's where they would be tapped out at. It'd be a 7-4 advantage, and what Luis Lucas here is engaging with is the idea that the map would go from 6 to 5 to 10 to 1. It would give Democrats an additional 3 seats in Virginia, and overall 4 compared to today's map, but 3 relative to the numbers we were just working with, and you would end up with math and a map that looks like this, right? Democrats would be at 229. And so essentially what it would do is all but nullify, maybe Republicans get 1 more seat than the Democrats here, but all but nullify what the Democrats would be losing in the redraws in Missouri, in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Texas, and ultimately show that Democrats, with their newfound political force in Virginia and across the country, have the means to be effective enough at changing the maps, at changing the boundaries, at playing and beating the Republicans at their own game. And that's why Virginia really stands in as this shock state, because Democrats somehow, if Louise Lucas is correct, and again, she's someone who has personally been burned by partisan gerrymandering. She is someone who has felt firsthand the very real effects of partisan politics and what it looks like to lose a seat that should have been winnable. Virginia, as much as it did go to George W. Bush, should not have been a dominating 8-3 advantage for the GOP election after election after election. Even in 2006, when Democrats flipped House control and Senate control, Virginia saw 0 gains for the Democratic Party. 0 across the seats. That matters. Louise Lucas remembers that. She remembers the congressional bid, and now, 20 years later, has the authority and the agency on the Democratic side to finally push back against a national GOP power grab. And it would be notable in and of itself that California would be giving Democrats 5 and Virginia would nearly rival that in terms of a new map. And so if Democrats do in fact go for the jugular, you will find that the map here and the math here will find that Democrats will be making massive gains across the board. Massive gains. And that's where, massive gains relative to what Republicans are trying to take away from them, and you get to about a net even. Maybe Republicans get a slight advantage if Indiana goes through maybe 1 or 2 seats, but certainly not enough to counteract the impending blue wave that is set to take place in November of 2026. And that will be the story. How Virginia and California prevented the Republican Party from having that dominating presence over their political party, that dominating presence over the Democrats, who are certainly expected to do well in 2026, but the Republicans have been trying every which way to try to nullify that across the board. So Virginia Democrats, if they're willing to get scrappy and play dirty in the way that Republicans are willing to too, then this map could make a massive difference. And I don't think it's a secret that this map here is being considered by Louise Lucas, who told us months ago through the same app that she was going to be considering a map redraw on behalf of the Democratic Party for the 2026 midterms. And now it looks like it might be happening. And as she's quote-unquote taking notes about a 10-to-1 map that would benefit the Democratic Party, it very much looks like Republicans are willing to play, Democrats are willing, rather, to play the game that Republicans have been for quite some time and willing to push back. And if they do so, the math actually looks quite good for the Democratic Party in 2026. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.